run through what I've done. I'm hoping today that we can have a conversation about data analysis. So I'm not going to go like through in detail through what I've done. There's still some, obviously there's more work that needs to be done, but. Okay. So starting with the, and again, I can't see you when I'm sharing my screen. So if you have comments, just please holler out. So started here, there were some suggestions from Caroline, but I added a little bit to this about the resource audit. I put in a little bit about making sure that in the audit that they figure out what kind of confidentiality people have, because that is so confusing for students and employees alike. So I think that's a really good opportunity for them to note that in their resource lists. Caroline pointed out that I had not talked about why I hadn't used the word advocate in the previous paragraph. So I added on and off campus confidential advocacy services. The reason, if that's not clear why we would do that, some students don't trust anybody on a college campus, and they're afraid that they'll be seen going into an office, or they've heard bad things or had bad experiences, or just don't trust grown-ups and are more likely to go into or are more likely to take advantage of off-campus services. So that's why I put that there. There's some more references I'll be adding. I put some more information about just who will have issue the survey, access the data, adding customized questions and responses, and then some stuff about communications. I went ahead and wrote up our notes on incentives, because there was a lot of really great information in that discussion last time, but I haven't done much more on maximizing response rates. Survey, I did add something about third-party vendors. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in data. And then where it's grayed out, I didn't work on that. That needs to be done. So this is where we're starting today. I added a section on ethical data handling, because I think that's just really relevant, and it's something that I think is probably obvious to all of us, but maybe is worth repeating. And the first three paragraphs here were, because the law does not specify the purposes for which the data can be used, we are trying to write an administrative rule that will make it clear that the data should not be sold, should not be used by third parties, should not be used for any reason other than the stated reasons of the survey. And then at the end, and data folks, if you can weigh in on this, I don't know where the response cell smaller than 5 comes from, but that seems to be fairly standard. I know some places are doing 10, but I'm not sure what you think. So if anyone wants to weigh in on that, I'd really, really appreciate that.
I think off the top of my head in New Hampshire, it is under 5 for everything that's not demographics, and then 10 for all demographics. I am like 99% sure.
Okay, thank you.
I think within Oregon, it's been variable too. I think there's been a 7 at points was used instead of 5. I think the higher the standard is probably better, especially since our idea is aggregation anyway, but 5 will be the minimum threshold. And that's just from, can you identify the person if you have enough of those pieces together? So we want to make sure we're over that cap.
Right. Okay. Hi, Kelly. We're just talking about cell size. Is anyone aware of any guidance from a professional institution or anything in the published literature that gives a basis for choosing that number?
Apologies for my late arrival. What number are you asking about, Rowan?
Sorry, Kelly, we're talking about cell size. And I put in there in that last paragraph that's on the screen right now, it says cell size is smaller than 5. Andrew says New Hampshire's doing 10 for cell sizes smaller than 10 get aggregated for demographics and 5 for everything else. Justin said in some schools in Oregon are using 7, but 5 is fairly standard.
I'm unaware of any sort of official formal number. I mean, I prefer 10. My experience tells me 10, but I think 5. Yeah.
Well, let's make it. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Can I just say that one of the to me, the biggest problem is not the actual cell size. Like if you have 5 people, chances that you can guess at who somebody is are pretty low. It's that people are tempted to guess, and the number doesn't actually have any impact on that whatsoever, except insofar as if people know there's a whole bunch, then they're far less likely to sort of think they know. But the biggest risk is just people saying, oh, I think I know who it is. Nobody ever actually confirms that, right? So anyway, to me, it's a tough call. I wish we could go at 10. 5 may be necessary though. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just thinking about, you know, what we're trying to weigh here is privacy and confidentiality versus losing the experiences of people who are in smaller numbers on a campus, right? And you don't want to do that. You don't want to, if you've got 5 people who are, you know, responding as LGBT, you risk losing all of their information if you aggregate them with the heterosexual folk, right? And so that's why it's really kind of a fraught situation. You want to protect their privacy, and at the same time you want to honor their experiences.
I totally agree with you, Rowan, but I would also say that to anybody who is making a decision about participation, should they happen to say, by having read this or perhaps participated once before and seen how the results came out, they may be dissuaded from participating if they see that the category that they fall in might get reported with too small of a number. And so that doesn't contradict anything you just said. It just, like you said, it's fraught. It just continues to underscore how fraught the decision is, right? So I think I would agree with you, though. That's why I said that 5 may be necessary. I think the third risk in all this is that if you collect the data from people in small cell categories and then don't report it out, then they're not going to participate the next time because they feel like they've been ignored or something like that. So
yeah,
fraught is the operative word in all of it.
Yeah. So I'm kind of wondering, and I realize that you are a small sample size, but I'm wondering if we can kind of get consensus from folks. I'm gonna stop sharing for just a second because I feel like this is one of those things where I really want to let everybody have an opportunity to weigh in. Okay.
So Rowan, I'm also going to be one of your, right? I'm a small cell school. We're going to have small cell numbers. And I agree, but I agree with everything both of you said. You know, I'm going to have a lot of cases that don't get reflected in the data that's reported. And right, but also if I did reflect them, it would be very easy to identify them. So I understand both sides of that, and I agree. I think that 5 is probably a good number. Just from talking to the other coordinators, I think if we make it much bigger, we're going to lose a whole bunch of experience. Right, because I feel like there are a lot of schools with under 10. Right? And so if we made it 10, then right, like we have to give that little bit of wiggle room, right? Because we're going to miss a lot of schools if we don't. So I agree that the 5, while fraught and may, right, I agree with Kelly, and presents some serious issues, also kind of seems necessary, just given the size of a lot of the institutions in Oregon. I mean, we have a few bigs, right? The 4 bigs, really, 3 bigs, and then the rest of us are all going to have much smaller sample sizes.
This is Lisa. I agree with 5 as well, along with everything the 3 of you said.
For what it's worth, at Willamette University, the Arts and Sciences faculty requires a minimum of 4 course evaluations before they'll report anything out on a class. So we are near a number that it, at least in a I would say a mainstream sort of way, is considered acceptable. I like 5 better than 4, but there are, of course, in course evaluations, a lot of concerns about whether people are identifiable or not. So our number is 4.
Yeah, I personally like 10 for demographics and then 5 for everything else. But again, I totally, yeah, fraught, right? Very tricky. But also just to say, I'm totally okay with 5 for both. I don't want to be the roadblock in, yeah.
Thanks.
So I was Googling, trying to find if the state had anything official, which I couldn't find. My recollection is from everything is that 5 is the minimum. They've been looking at a higher number. I would have qualms about having 2 different standards because we're not asking the institutions to do more. So the 5 for this, 10 for that could be confusing in itself. Since I haven't found anything, I'm fine with the 5. I just wish I could remember where the 7 came from, which I'm still looking for.
They may have been having this discussion and gone, okay, well, what about 7? And settled on it that way. That's often how these things happen. Okay, great, thanks. And Sarah, I know that you're a visitor here, but if you want to weigh in, we're happy to hear from you too.
Thank you. I would tend to agree that if we do 10, I think we are going to end up losing a lot. Just because I know that's quite a few for some of the smaller schools.
Thank you.
But otherwise, I agree with what everyone's saying. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, Sarah's about the same size school as me. So yeah, we're about, yeah. And hey, doesn't have to be the most scientific methodology as long as we are consistent. I think.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
And we also have the annual reports, right? And I think that's another tool at our disposal to look at the fuller picture, because there's a lot of things in the reports that may or may not come up in the climate survey, right?
That's a good point. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you all so much for spending the time on that with me. We have come to consensus that 5 works. And Justin, I think your point about it being making it simpler, especially for smaller schools with less experience at data processing, probably keeping it at 5 across is best. So we'll make that as a recommendation. And schools may want to, if they have a different standard that they generally use that's higher than 5, that would be fine, I think. So, okay, let me go back to sharing. Okay. All right, and if anybody does come across that where that number came from, I have a feeling that the original number just exactly originated exactly as we just did it there. Okay. So I don't have anything else for results dissemination. I'm going to go up here to, okay. So for handling and protecting data, the things that we still need to talk about are ensuring anonymity in the data. And I think kind of covered that under ethical, actually. The IRB considerations, who will access data, and then retaining and destroying data. So thinking about, I'm curious to know how people think most schools are going to process this data. They're going to have, I'm going to go way down to the end here. So I know that, oh my gosh. Sorry, totally spacing his name. Our other council member is working on the IRB stuff. I'm sorry, Jimmy, thank you. Jimmy. Jimmy is working on looking at some of the IRB stuff. If a school doesn't have an IRB, who handles the research? Like if if you're doing the National College Health Association survey or something like that.
My guess would be institutional research or whatever its equivalent is, but I could be wrong. That'd be the logical place to look for it. I honestly don't know what schools without IRBs do when they need one.
I don't think we have let me think. Do we have an official IRB? I don't know if we do. I can ask what we do, because I think our institutional research handles our like climate survey and things like that. So it might be that it's institutional research office for us as well.
Do faculty ever do research, Jennifer? I mean,
we do, but trying to think how we've done ours.
I mean, if it doesn't involve human subjects, then you don't need an IRB necessarily, but
yeah, we have a lot of research that does not involve human subjects, right? Because we're engineering.
Yeah.
A lot of our research is like additives and manufacturing things. So I don't know how much IRB we actually. Let me check.
Yeah.
I can report back what I find out.
Most of the community colleges.
Oh, sorry, this is Lisa.
No, please go ahead, Lisa. Sorry.
What I've heard is that they collaborate with an institution that does have an IRB to get help if they're doing research on human subjects.
That probably makes sense, Lisa, because I think that the only human research subject or the human subject research we do is through our maybe through our allied health department, and we would probably partner with OHSU on all of those. So we would probably use OHSU's IRB, but let me double check.
I suppose I should add, it doesn't, I mean, I'm the one that said it, but research doesn't have to just be human subjects that need IRB, right? Like animal subjects. And I mean, there's just, yeah. And in order to get federal funding, realizing that may sort of become a scarce thing, but they require IRBs for just about everything. So anyway.
Yeah. And I just want to clarify too that we're talking about IRBs and human subject research. This survey is I've never heard of any school saying, oh yeah, this is human subjects research, it's got to go through an IRB process. But if a school has an IRB, they would show the survey to them and then the IRB would decide, and they I can say they pretty much are going to decide that it's exempt. As long as there are certain protections in place. They're going to be concerned to make sure that the resources are available to students, that there are things like the opt-outs, that the what we're calling the informed consent is there, that gives students information so they can truly make a choice to consent to participate in the survey. So that's why I'm asking about what schools without IRBs might do when they're doing this kind of data collection on their students. And Caroline, the community colleges generally don't have IRBs, right? Do you have an Office of Institutional Research?
We have an Office of Institutional Effectiveness, which is probably similar. I couldn't tell you exactly, but we do have an office that looks at all of our data overall. I'm actually flagging this to talk to my supervisor about regarding what would look like to work at this office. I know this office is swamped on a regular basis. That's the biggest thing that's coming up for me regarding this, but wanting to ensure that we are looking at the data with the strongest lens possible. So we do have an office that we could work with.
And do you think that's, do you know, if you don't, it's okay. Do you know if that's kind of standard for the community colleges? Okay, thank you.
I don't. We're such a big community college comparatively, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm happy to speak to the community college since we work with, a handful of them. So no, most of them do not have an IRB. We do, though it was really formed officially because we need it for a federal grant. So that's actually just my office, that we can pull in some other people as needed. Most of the smaller institutions don't have really anything there. That's why it was so important for me to have, if we could get the U of O or one of the big four, so I'm put it, to do the official IRB, because most people are going to accept that as being rigorous enough. In terms of surveying, like SESI or SENS, which are some national surveys around community colleges that do go to students, the smaller institutions generally accept the instrument. They go through their process of collecting the data. It's analyzed there, and then goes back to whatever the closest they have to institutional research, which might be me for some of the colleges. But it is much more informal and it is much more scale. That's why keeping this simple is really the only feasible route for the smaller. I mean, to Carolyn's point, PCC is gigantic if you look at the amount of FTE they account for in the state versus, say, Oregon Coast or Clarksville Community College.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. I think what I'm going to do is, do y'all know, is OCA still pretty active, the Oregon Community College Association?
OCCA, yeah, that's the lobbying group. They are, Elizabeth Cox Brand there has the Oregon Student Success Center, which we partner with them for a statewide data collection tool, which is neither here nor there. But that would be a great resource insofar as she knows everyone everywhere in terms of the community colleges.
Okay. All right. I'll reach out to her. Okay. So the reason that this is important, because we want to try to give them a roadmap for figuring out how to move the survey through their channels to the proper people for analysis. So if you have institutional research or institutional effectiveness, they're used to manipulating data and they can give you some really important information. One of the things that's going to be really important for colleges to do internally, even if they don't put it in the summary, is to compare the pool of students who respond to the survey with the overall college population. Right. So if you've got 10,000 students and 1,000 of them complete the survey, are those 1,000 representative of that 10,000, or are they really different? Are they all female? Are they, do they not represent the entire population? So that's one reason why having access to the office that already has kind of all that statistical information is really important. Another reason for it is that and Jennifer, I'm kind of speaking for you here, but most Title IX coordinators are not researchers and aren't practiced in analyzing data. And I have a feeling that, we recommend that who issues the survey be specific to the campus, because some campuses don't trust their Title IX offices, and some have a counseling center that does this kind of stuff already for, maybe the college health assessment or something. But I have a feeling that mostly it's going to be the Title IX coordinators who end up messing with this data. So we need to give them some guidelines for how to do that. And they're going to be working with the survey or with the reports that they can pull off of Qualtrics and SurveyMonkey. I am not familiar with those. I wish that I were, because I think one of the things that we could do is to advise them as to which reports from Qualtrics and SurveyMonkey would be most useful to them in preparing their summaries. So the survey is going to be issued by somebody on campus. All of that data is going to come back to somebody who's going to function as a principal investigator. We're going to want them to de-identify the data. So they're going to need to go through and make sure if anyone wrote anything in, they didn't write in, you know, I was sexually assaulted by, you know, Charlie Brown, because we want to strip that kind of identifying data from the database. We make it really clear, by the way, in the survey that this is not a reporting mechanism, that if they want to report, these are the ways that they can do it, but it's not unheard of for students to just, you know, put a lot of information into the surveys. So they'll remove that, any identifying data, they'll aggregate their cell sizes, and then they'll report out the data. And that's the minimum that they have to do. They may choose to do other things with the data internally. For example, they might want to evaluate the effectiveness of their prevention education. We can offer them some questions to do that. They might want to know, okay, we have an advocacy center on campus, and yet 90% of people who said they'd experienced sexual misconduct aren't using the advocacy center. Why is that? So those are the kinds of questions they're going to ask internally. I don't think we need to put that in here. But does that make sense, that pathway of the survey is issued, the data comes back, the data is cleaned up, you know, any identifying information is removed, it's aggregated, and then the things that we're going to require them to report get added to the summary report. Does that feel like that process would work?
I'll jump in. I don't have a research background, so I don't feel like I have a lot to add, but I wanted to make sure to just share that so that we're sharing. But one thing I was thinking about though, Rowan, you named that some of the ways that this information can be helpful, and also noting that we might not need to add it here. I do think it could be helpful for the schools maybe that don't have the same resources on hand, as they, just as that thought-provoking ways that you might consider using this data could be the following. I do think that could be useful, especially for folks who are handling this who have less experience with research.
Thank you.
Yeah, like an additional or optional findings kind of narrative. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think that I agree. I think that's helpful, just saying, you know, these are not required, but some ways that schools might use this data are, and I can pull that. Okay. So send out survey, results are de-identified, cells are aggregated, report is prepped. That sounds good. We can make some suggestions about how else they might use the data. A couple of other things that I wanted to check in with you all are, what do we want them to do with incomplete surveys? And I'm going to stop sharing here because this is important. So the way that this is going to work is that you're going to go through the survey, you're going to answer all the questions, and then the last question is going to be, okay, you finished the survey. Thank you so much. Please do not exit yet. If you don't hit the submit button, we won't count your data. That's usually how these things work. And the reason for that is somebody could get all the way through that and then kind of panic and go, oh my God, I don't want to submit this. So this is one last place where we're giving them the choice of whether or not they want us to see their data. And so it's one last opportunity for them to consent. What that means, though, is that, and usually, I don't know what percentage it is. I know at Reed, we had quite a few surveys that were almost completed and then the person stopped. And it was so awful because there was all this lovely data there that I couldn't, you know, that I wasn't able to touch. And so it's kind of frustrating. You also don't know if someone maybe wanted you to consider up to that point and then stopped, right? So it's one of those things that we kind of need to decide. Do we want to have them click that submit button? Then we get to look at your data. we're going to discard anything that didn't get submitted to us with that button? Or do we want to use partial surveys?
I'm thinking about that regardless of which direction we go, it needs to be clear how that's going to work in the instructions. Like, the informed consent usually says you may, it includes a statement that you may discontinue participation at any time, which is a very vague in specific statement about whether or not the stuff that you've provided before already is going to get counted or not. So I think I think I could totally be talked out of this and may change my mind, but my gut is telling me that given the nature of this survey and the fact that we want people to be comfortable doing it, we should probably set this up so that only after you've finished and finalized and submitted does your data get recorded, and we can be explicit about that in the instructions, that if you discontinue, any answers up to that point will not be counted. Maybe there's a middle ground. I don't know how these systems can be set up. Maybe there's a middle ground that sort of saves at the end of each page or something like that. But I feel like I want to err on the side of personal safety and not leaving anybody even at any level of risk of being made anxious or traumatized or anything by concern that they wanted to discontinue, but they're afraid that their answers remain in things. So I'm gonna start out by voting with, let's only keep the ones that people officially submit at the end, with an open mind about reasons why we may do it why we may change our mind about that.
I agree with that. And I think there's a way, this is Lisa, sorry. I think there's a way to be, to still get those submits, to maybe post a screenshot a couple slides before and say, you're nearly done. When you're done, you'll see something like this. It looks like this. Be sure to click that big red submit button. Or at the beginning, and maybe, one slide before they're done.
Question regarding our platforms we're using. If someone chooses to close the survey early, because my understanding is if you close it, you have to restart it. Is it possible to make it so that another screen will pop up and says, hi, just wanted to make sure you're intentionally closing this. If you're not, use this button to go back, so that people don't accidentally leave it when they didn't intend to and then don't want to start it. The other thing, that middle ground that kind of has been discussed, maybe there's that opportunity. The only creative thinking I had was to say, if you don't want to continue the survey, but you do want your answers up to this point to be included, plus push submit now. If you just keep closing this, none of your responses will be included up to this point or something like that. So that's the only middle ground I could think of if we want to get informed consent on partial answers. But I would, if there, in the very least, if there's a way to say like, hey, are you sure you want to close this? I think that would be helpful.
I will check into that, Carolyn, because I'm not sure. Yeah, if we did that and they went to an exit page that said, hey, if you really want to, thank you for doing this, here's the resource link to the resource list. If you didn't mean to close, here's the back button, use that. Yeah. My understanding is that when they close that window, everything is lost. But I have had a couple of people tell me they were able to, when they opened it back up again, they came back to the place they started from. I don't understand how that works because it's not collecting IP addresses. Maybe, and that's really disturbing to me actually, because I kind of need to check into that, because if, two people are using the same computer, right? You're at the library and you open it up and you're like, wait a minute, this is somebody else's data. Yeah, so I want to double check that. And I will also check to see if we can let them decide to submit partial data. I'm not sure because the way that you have to kind of move through the survey in a linear fashion, either up or down, and you can't really jump ahead, unfortunately. Okay, so I'm not seeing any dissent about, yeah, we need to make sure that they intend to submit the data. We want to give them that last chance to let us know, yeah, I really want you to see this data. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay, and then the last questions I think are about retaining and destroying data. There's nothing in the law that says that they have to retain data or that they can't retain data. We know that, I mean, I think the standard is 7 years, right? Although it may be less at some colleges because oftentimes when a student graduates, then their data might be destroyed. But since we don't have IDs here, we can't really do that. Do we want to suggest a retention and data destruction schedule, or do we want to just kind of leave that open?
Well, Title IX's record keeping is 7 years. So I don't know if I was going to keep the survey and the report with every year's, like, if, at the end of the year, I just bundle all my stuff together and zip it up in a file and, right? Maybe that would be right. I don't know. That's probably how I will store them all together that year, academic year, all the Title IX information all goes into a file.
It hurts my soul to throw useful data away.
Yeah.
And I think in this case, but I'm also very cognizant of both the law and ethics and good practice. I think there's value in retaining these results, and I think there's safety in the fact that they are anonymized and de-identified. And as long as our strictures are clear that they should be held by a data professional, they should not be of open access to anybody that except data professional at each school, that sort of thing. Again, I know the arguments against kind of where I fall here, but I just sort of feel like either a very long period of time or an indefinite period of time has value to institutions. And people often say, well, you've still got the report, you still have the summary results. That's true, but sometimes a new question comes along, and sometimes you wish you had the original data and could sort of see where you have been. So again, with a very open mind, my initial inclination is to say, since the data are protected on 2 levels, that is, there should be held by somebody who has a very, very safe and secure data source, data storage system, and the data themselves are completely anonymized. The response lines are completely anonymized. I'd be comfortable with sort of an indefinite preservation of the data, the raw data, that is.
I was thinking that I do think it'd be really helpful to give some recommendation to colleges. I think that it's so common that if we don't outline some specifics, then people are like, I don't know. So in the very least, like regardless of the length, and I agree, I think there's a lot of value in having it for a longer period of time. I do think if we can come up with at a minimum of suggestions or best practices, I think that would just support the schools as they are trying to make decisions, especially the schools this is going to feel really brand new to. I think it'll just set them up for more success. And I have to apologize because I have to jump off a few minutes early, but thank you all so much.
And Kelly, I totally appreciate what you're saying, and I think you're right. I think there could be, situations where we want to go back and look and go, wait a minute, we missed that, and it's something that's come up, or there's a question that's raised. One of the concerns that I have is the way that data storage works on college campuses. So if you're the person who has access to that database, Kelly, and you leave Willamette, what happens to that database? Who then would be allowed to access it?
Yeah, certainly in the language I'm using, I am assuming that the institution is going to hand that data off to somebody with the same appropriate credential as the person who was overseeing it at any given moment, right? Like I mean, I also realize that might be a little too much to necessarily assume. But I would say that all the more reason why I would agree with what Carolyn said a few moments ago before she had to take off, which is, I think we already have this there, but if we don't, we should definitely say, the following are sort of baseline expectations about who has access, who's managing it, how it's being managed, how it's being stored. And if you can't in good conscience as an institution sort of say, oh, we definitely have those safeguards in place, well, then you should put them in place. Like that. So my hope, like at Willamette, to use Willamette as an example, when I came into this responsibility almost exactly 5 years ago, it was with the previous IR person retiring, so they immediately lost access to it, and I immediately assumed control of it. And the system is set up such that only the person sitting in this chair has access to where all of our institutional research data are at. So we have an institutional research data drive that is only accessible by me, our IR analyst, and our IT people who give us the permission in the first place. Provost can't access it, the president can't access it, so it's only our office. So hopefully institutions have that kind of system set up, and that is literally part of the job description. One of the lines in my job description is, faithfully executes, not to borrow the oath of office, but basically is responsible for ensuring that data ethics are followed and that only people who have appropriate access to data get it, and that refers to everything. So my hope is that we would be okay there, but if we do go in this direction of sort of indefinite preservation, I think we should make very clear at the outset that it is on the assumption that institutions have these kinds of very clear data management, data access policies, that we are encouraging them to follow the law and execute the survey, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And final thought, sorry to kind of ramble on here, but my sense is that any school that may not have that in place is also not going to be following any kind of records disposal rules that we might put in place. Like if we did go with, say, what Jennifer's thought about 7 years as a minimum, like anybody who doesn't have these other things in place is not going to be paying attention to whether or not it's time to throw data away or not.
Mm-hmm.
That only happens in a really well-organized data environment. Right. And even schools like us, who I think are pretty well organized, still struggle with sort of keeping a calendar of who has data and who should be disposing of it at what point in time. So I don't think there's any additional. I guess this is actually making me feel even stronger about the indefinite preservation, is that it's going to be mistreated if we don't have any school that doesn't have adequate protection in place. The data may be vulnerable anyway. And we have no control over that at all. So, yeah.
Okay. So I'm seeing Jennifer saying maybe 7 could be the minimum. Okay. Because I think that's true too, that they're just having the space to store that and maintaining access to it. So, okay. So we can say that.
And I just think that the 7 gives us opportunities to go back and look at data from the survey to see if, like if 3 years from now somebody comes back and says, you know, I reported this to the institution and nobody ever did anything about it. And I can't find a report anywhere, but they reported it in the survey or something, then at least I would be able to go back and find what they reported. I don't know. I'm just keep trying to think of like all of the ways that I might be able to use that data in the future, or if I could look back and see if there's a change in how often a certain type of thing gets reported on my campus, or even the way that the students are talking about, right? Certain acts could really influence how we sort of shape our prevention, right? Trainings, right? I mean, if students, I know students talk about sex very different than I talk about sex, right? And sexual misconduct. So like just getting that kind of using that data in other ways, like we were talking about earlier, like all the other things you could learn from it, right? I think that's something else that you can learn from it. How are students like orienting to those things? How do they talk about them? What are the words that they're using, right? So that we can talk about those things in our prevention training. Because I mean, language is really important when you do prevention training, right? Are you speaking the same language as the audience? And so I just think it could be useful for all those reasons. And if we had multiple years of data, we might be able to sort of see trends in those changes.
Yeah, that's a good point. Prevention takes a long time to take root and for you to see it actually growing. It's like mycelium, right? So yeah. I'm thinking maybe we say 7 is the minimum, but recognize that some schools may want to keep it longer than that. I think it's really just to not to put to. I think it's really important that we make it clear that they're not allowed to go back and look for specific students in their data. Like, you know, one way I do not want this data to be used is in a university says, oh, well, we've got all that data. We want the lawyers to go through it because we're being sued by a student who says that this happened. And, you know, and we want to find out if they actually, you know, recorded this back in the day, right? So we certainly don't want that to happen. So, okay, I really like the idea for saying these are the best baselines for safeguarding the data. Kelly, I hate to put anything on you, but it was your idea. Do you have like some baselines that, or could you like draft some that you could send me, or would you take a look at some that I sent?
Yes, all the above.
Okay, if you could draft them, that'd be awesome. If you have time for that, I don't know what your schedule's like. That would be great. I would feel so much more comfortable with that. One other thing that I think I didn't make clear that I think we should make clear, because I just, as you guys were talking, I was thinking, ooh, if I was a faculty researcher or a graduate student, and I knew that this pool of data was there and I wanted to do a thesis or a paper, I would be trying so hard to get my paws into it, right? And so I think we have to make it clear that it can't be accessed by you know, it can't be used for research purposes other than what was, you know, it was originally intended. And I'm wondering about wanting to state very clearly that we don't think students should have access to the data for any reason, because I know that, you know, one of the things that we often do is like, let's get a grad student, right? But I just have real concerns about students having access to this data. And I don't know if that's being overly paranoid or not.
It's not.
Okay.
I mean, my opinion only, I entirely agree with you. I don't think that's overly paranoid. In fact, I just wrote that down as one of the things I'm going to be sure I put in my draft list of things, is that students, this is not something that somebody should, there are no training wheels for how to use this appropriately or inappropriately. This is just one of those things that students should not be given access to.
Right.
Professional researchers in the pursuit of, I mean, you know, FERPA is not going to be an issue here because there's not any individuals identified, but FERPA still gives us a pretty clear roadmap for how we should think about ethics. To the extent that there is utility and institutional understanding of self, that is self being the institution, then institutions should be free to use it however they see fit that way, as long as they don't violate any of the other basic principles.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if faculty, let's say that, just a pure hypothetical, so there's a low grade consortium between 5 private liberal arts schools in the Northwest. Let's say that those 5 schools decided that they wanted to get together and faculty from each school to do some sort of academic study on this. That would have to go through IRB. It would have to be approved by, should have approval of the institution, participating institutions themselves. I mean, those to me would be best practices, but I feel like it is just fine to sort of really clamp down and be very explicit in the instructions, and especially say it is the expectation that this data would never be analyzed by students or by classes for learning purposes or things like that. There are enough other ways to get data. We do not have to let them have this one. Too much at risk. And students will hate that, and some faculty will hate that, but it's still the reality. Like, you aren't entitled to access to everything that you think would be interesting, even though it feels that way on a university campus. So
Yeah.
I agree with you. Sorry, again, once again, far too many words to say. I think you're totally right.
And if they really want to just get like frequency counts or things, they can use the other public facing report, right? For those things.
Right.
They don't need to get sort of those qualitative pieces out of, because I think that's what they would really want, right? Is those
Right.
qualitative pieces out of this survey, but they don't really need those. They can do the quant pieces. And then if they want to run through IRB and do their own sort of qualitative survey of students, then IRBs can approve those, right? I mean, I did one of those as a graduate student, right? I didn't need to use institutional data. I found my own subjects. So, I mean, I think that the other report can supplement, and they can use that in conjunction with any of their own sort of survey data if they want.
Okay. All right.
I just, people who haven't done research in way with information that puts people at risk do not yet appreciate how even a misunderstood reporting or use of the data itself can be damaging, even to an anonymized set of respondents. It can damage a population in a community quite inadvertently, such that people in that community who may not have even responded to the survey in the first place become subject to the results of the survey. Like, that's the kind of thing and that's my rationale for saying untrained professionals should not be allowed access to this data, period.
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of trained professionals who shouldn't have access to it, because, I mean, this is where faculty governance and institutional faculty governance becomes part of the equation too. But anyway, sorry,
Yeah.
I've said too much, but I feel pretty strongly about this.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think especially this particular data set is so highly political and has become such a bomb, really. I mean, I can see students wanting to get into it to expose the university for covering up sexual assault, and I can also see people wanting to get into it to try to expose the university, expose the students for, over-reporting or something. Yeah. So, okay. All right. Yeah. Tight limits. And just so you know, Grand River Solutions right now is meeting with a whole bunch of people, trying to get them to, they are interested in aggregating all the data from all the institutions that are doing climate surveys so that they can use that for their own uses. It becomes a product in the hands of a third-party vendor. I'm so worried about that right now. But,
I don't like that. I mean, I work with them and I don't
yeah.
necessarily like that.
Yeah. So I think, so one thing that, I tried to write for those rules is that, if you're using a third-party vendor, because I can see schools totally wanting to do that so much easier, right? If you're going to use a third-party vendor, they have to follow the same ethical guidelines that everybody else does, and they cannot aggregate and use the data for other purposes. So, yeah. Okay. All right, we are right about at 10 o'clock. I feel like we've done a really good job of kind of knocking this around. My schedule right now is I'm going to be in the office for the rest of the week. we're off on Monday, of course, and then I'm gone Thursday and Friday next week. We have the full council meeting on Tuesday. So I am not expecting to get you a draft until the full draft to look at until the week of the 2nd. And I'll try to get that done as soon as possible. So yeah, so Kelly, if you can get me that in the next week or so, that would be awesome. I can incorporate that, but there's no like Tuesday deadline or anything on this. And then we're going to meet again. Kevin, can you remind me when our next meeting is? I'm sorry. It's the 2nd, isn't it?
There is not one scheduled. I scheduled the first 3 because it covered the 3
okay.
topics, but I kind of left it open after that. So I guess it's up to everybody if they want to schedule another meeting.
Yeah, I think we should. Let's look at maybe like the 9th and then we can see if we need to go beyond that. But let's try for the week of the 9th. Maybe, I'm so sorry, maybe you can send out another poll.
We could just keep the 11 o'clock on Monday, which was kind of the standard before. So
yeah, could you schedule for the 9th then?
Yeah, the 9th at 11 will do.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, and no meeting on the 2nd. Okay. Great. All right. Okay, thank you all so much. Bye, Lisa. This is always such a great meeting. I really, really enjoy these conversations. And I feel like we're really, like, this is such important stuff, and it feels kind of weird that we left it to kind of the tail end. But I'm really glad we got there. Okay, so have a good day. Have a great Memorial